Welcome to Command Control Power, the longest-running Apple consulting podcast. For over 10 years, we've produced weekly episodes featuring epic tales of tech support and troubleshooting, discussions about managing our clients and businesses, and interviews with colleagues and vendors. For our pro listeners, we offer Patreon-exclusive shows. This private podcast feed is tailor-made for IT professionals looking for advice and guidance on the more challenging aspects of running your practice, working with your clients and employees, and managing your fleets of devices. For a modest monthly contribution, you'll unlock a world of deeper Apple expertise, meaningful connections, and a shared passion for Apple technology. Simply visit commandcontrolpower.com and click support. And now on to the show. Welcome a former guest and a returning guest, Ben Greiner, founder of Forget Computers and Apple champion and growth advisor at Addigy. Welcome, Ben.
Yeah, thank you. I was just looking at the last time I was on the show because it seems like yesterday.
Yeah.
It was 10 years ago.
Wow.
10 years. How old are we now?
I know. Tell me about it.
And I must say, and I don't know if I've gotten any better at this because you guys do this a lot more than I do, but I was listening to myself and I remember my wife would often say I was too monotone. And yes, I am very monotone. When I get excited, it goes up one notch, scale of 1 to 10. You can barely tell. My apologies for that, but maybe, and I see Simon just joined. I think Simon mentioned that it's late for him and he wanted a bedtime story. So I think my voice is soothing, maybe for bedtime.
Perfect for bedtime. Yeah. Yeah,
I think our wives
start with the bedtime. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, our wives are our worst critics. My wife keeps on telling me I'm too loud. I was just telling you this moments before we started. Yeah. And I don't know if you guys have your client voice, but a lot of times when you're either speaking on the phone, in the course of wanting to speak definitively and project your ideas, you probably end up, like me, I end up talking too loud, but
pretty forcefully.
Inside voice.
Yeah. That's a good point, Jerry, because you really do have to present things with confidence when you're talking to customers. Right. And if you don't, they're going to sense that maybe this isn't the right decision for them.
That's right.
I've definitely run into that. I've also run into, this is a long time ago, but it still sticks with me, a client who felt that I wasn't upset enough or showing enough urgency in fixing their problem. And at the same time, I've had clients who say, I appreciate that you remain chill during this catastrophe and you walked me through it. But you can't please everybody.
It's true. Yeah. And that's the thing. We tailor everything we do to the client. And that's oftentimes like what leads to more success is being able to sense that. And with some clients, I just have learned in the last few years, especially, that I have to interrupt people on the phone. They get off on a story and you guys can interrupt me because I get off on stories too, but clients get off on stories sharing lots of detail that you just know is not relevant. You've already got a plan of attack. Like you want to dive in and start fixing it. And there's ways of being very careful and deferring to them and all that. But sometimes you really just have to cut in and say, now, if you don't mind, I'm going to start to guide this conversation a little bit. I need to ask you, as Jerry says, a yes or no question here and just start to cut to the chase a little bit. Yeah, it's interesting. This is the thing. These are the kind of things that evolve over time. You guys have both been doing this quite a long time. I just celebrated 20 years. Jerry, I know you're like right there. And Ben, is it 25 years for Forget Computers?
Yeah, technically. I started in 1998 and how old was I then? I don't know, 11, 12 maybe. Very young.
Yeah.
And I've been doing this a while. Technically, Forget Computers did go away in 2020 when I sold my business to Ntiva. Mm-hmm. But I did retain the name and the domain and the email, and maybe it'll be resurrected in some fashion. I've been operating under it for so long.
Yeah.
But really, once I sold the business, I spent 2 years at Ntiva integrating my Apple team. A lot of them are still there. Some of them have left, but a great Apple team. That I spent 2 years there, and then I took some time off. And it was during that time off that I got a call from Addigy, from Jason Detbarn at Addigy, and he said, "I heard you're not at Ntiva anymore. What are you doing?" And I didn't really have a good response to what I was doing. I was planning my next move, which was taking my time. And he said, "Would you mind coming to help Addigy talk to clients about your experience?" So that's what I'm doing now, is talking to customers around the world, which is really great, about my experience growing an Apple business, both independently at Forget Computers, and then in a much larger organization at Ntiva. And that organization continues to grow. So I know, I don't think you specifically asked for my background, but I just fell into it.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what I would like to hear. And that fills in some of the gaps in my understanding. Now, we've had one of your colleagues from Ntiva, Ross Matsuda, on the show, also a great Addigy user, super helpful in the Addigy channel on the Mac admin Slack. And was he with Forget Computers before Ntiva, or was he an Ntiva person?
No, he was at the local Chicago Apple retail store. I think he was a genius. And one of our other hires from there recommended him, and he came on board and worked for me for several years. And then he originally was not our administrator. It was when we made the move from Jamf to Addigy that our Jamf admins, although they said they were totally cool with me moving to Addigy, I don't think they were that cool with it.
Yeah, I bet.
And so they eventually left, and we needed a replacement, and Ross raised his hand, and I'm so glad he did, because he is fantastic at running. He could have been fantastic at Jamf, but it just so happens we were using Addigy, and now he's fantastic at Addigy. And as you said, he's a great resource in the Mac admin Slack channel, in the Addigy channel. And I would say I need to go back and listen to his recording, because I knew he was on, what's that other podcast, the Mac Admin podcast?
Mac Admins, yeah.
He was on there, but I don't think I realized he was on yours. So I need to go back and listen to that.
Yeah, he was great. Yeah.
When did you actually make the switch from Jamf to Addigy? Because when you were on our show, you were selling, what did you call them at the time? I think portals, or you were able to sell off portions of your Jamf installation to folks like myself who could buy Jamf space on your server, if that's a
we had at Jamf we were hosting our infrastructure. That's what you had to do when we started in, I think, 2007. You had to host it yourself. And even in 2014, when I was on this show, there might have been, I don't remember when Jamf introduced the cloud solution, but every time we evaluated it, it wasn't quite where we wanted it to be, and didn't feel that it was worth moving. But so when we moved to Addigy, we did terminate our Jamf cloud infrastructure. And at the time, we had something called Robot Cloud. And Robot Cloud was really a package solution, as you said, Jerry, for others to plug into, and with very little effort get going very quickly. Now, either I'm terrible at marketing, which is totally plausible, or I was just a little too early to that game, because what I found is a lot of people did not want to outsource that. They wanted to do it themselves. And as much as I love to say, hey, look, this is ready and built for you, you can just plug in, people wanted to do it themselves. So, of course, we continued to use that tool, and it continued to evolve, and it's still being used today at Ntiva. And I think it's fair for me to say publicly that when I left there, we were working on actually integrating the interface we had built to talk to first Jamf and then Addigy. We made it work with ConnectWise. And we may see in the near future from Ntiva a solution that kind of integrates Mac and Windows into that original Robot Cloud interface, which has now been pared down to VisionBot, a web interface for basically sharing with your customers all the devices you have in your management systems. And then we also used it as our tier 1 support desk interface. So you didn't have to know Jamf or Addigy very well. You just had to know VisionBot. And the last thing I'll say about this is it was really invaluable to us when we transitioned from Jamf to Addigy, because the client-facing view of the world was VisionBot. The clients didn't notice anything changing. We just swapped out the back end.
Wow, amazing. I'm curious also to hear more about your kind of reasoning and desire to move to Addigy from Jamf. Obviously, as listeners and viewers know, as the Apple champion at Addigy, maybe there's a little bias now, but you made that decision well before you joined the Addigy team. So what was some of the reasoning back then?
Yeah. So let me put myself back in that mindset. And I think it was around 2018, maybe 2019. And I had no plans to leave Jamf, although when I met Jamf, there were 34 people at the company. growing up with Jamf, there came a time where they took off. Yeah. And so my relationship with them certainly changed. And I got approached by somebody at Addigy who was formerly at Jamf. And they said, hey, Ben, remember all that stuff you've been asking me for at Jamf? I think we have something for you here. Awesome. And I said, okay, I'll take a look at it. And I liked what I saw. And my thinking was Jamf had served me really well for over 10 years, but I had plans for the next 10 years. And I wasn't sure if my plans aligned with the tool that I was using. And then here's this tool, Addigy, that looked very interesting. So I went back to Jamf, and to their credit, I asked them, this is what they're promising me. Is this on your roadmap, like at all? And the answer was no. So I decided, okay, thank you very much. Appreciate it. We've got to make this move. And it actually did, and I can talk more about why, but it coincidentally and very nicely set me up for success when getting acquired, because making the integration into a Windows world, I think, is much easier with a tool like Addigy, as opposed to, at least at the time, Jamf. Obviously, Jamf has continued to evolve, and I haven't kept up with it, so I shouldn't be speaking to that. And I don't mean to disparage Jamf at all. I had a great relationship with them. And in fact, if taking my Addigy hat off, I would say anyone out there who's looking at managing their devices, just look at the Apple focus tools like Jamf or Kanji or Addigy, and try to avoid those that try to do everything else. They haven't convinced me yet that it's possible to do both platforms really well, and that includes Intune. And I just published a little piece about that on LinkedIn. So anyway, you got to stop me, or I'll just keep blabbing.
No, this is great. Yeah. And if you could speak more to the why, what were some of the features you were looking for in Addigy that even a number of years ago, they already met your requirements? Now they've taken off. Mm-hmm. And so I can't say enough good things about the tool. I use it every day. It's how I run my entire business remotely. I'm 100% remote away from most of where my clients physically are. And I largely depend on Addigy to make that possible. But what about you? What works for you then and now in Addigy?
Yeah, if I can remember correctly, we did evaluate it pretty seriously, and we evaluated Addigy and all the other tools available at the time, including, was it Fleetsmith, the one that Apple purchased? I think that was an option. I remember we were hosting our own Jamf environment, which, to be honest, was growing more complex and weighing on my mind. We got to keep this thing going.
Right.
So the ability to move to a platform that was built for the cloud, like from the start, built for the cloud, as opposed to one that had, migrated to the cloud, it just felt a lot snappier and easier, and had the multi-tenancy features that we were looking for. And I think that, to Jason's credit, that comes from his experience at Kaseya, where Kaseya had built a multi-tenant platform, Windows focused, and he took that idea and said, why can't we do that on the Apple side? And so I just felt that if I was going to continue to go upstream with bigger customers, a lot of them in the Windows space, I needed a tool that was a little more scalable. And that, for me, was Addigy. But I must admit, if I had left it up to the techs on my team, at first, they probably would have been hesitant, because one, we all like to complain about our clients not liking change, but techs don't like change either. We're learning new tools. And there was a lot of the admins at the time, they were certified in Jamf. So my certifications are worthless in Addigy. And I don't even think at the time Addigy had a good certification. They do now, but they didn't then. So the point of sharing that is I did make a tough decision, which is not unlike my decision to move from Slack to Teams, which also was very unpopular with my team. If anyone here has ever tried to do that, I think that was the hardest thing I ever did. Moving from Jamf to Addigy, super easy compared to getting my team to move from Slack to Teams. But I have reasons for that too. And ultimately, I think those were good business decisions that had to be made. And maybe I wasn't as emotionally invested in those tools, so it was easier for me to make that decision.
That makes sense. Yeah. Yeah, it also brings up the question of migrating. So your company was 100% Mac focused prior to your move to Ntiva. So how was that kind of culturally, or what were some of the challenges with integrating your Mac focused team into this larger organization that also supports Windows?
And let's talk about the size difference because it is significant. So Ntiva has grown by acquisition, really. They pick up new clients on their own, but they've also grown through acquisition of smaller MSPs. Now, smaller MSPs in the Windows world, I think, is a little different than smaller MSPs in the Mac world, right? Are you guys still 100% Apple focused, or you do both?
Yeah,
okay,
I am
100%.
Okay. Yeah. So obviously, the market is still, despite the fact that I thought it would have changed 20 years ago, still predominantly Windows heavy. We all know that. So when a small MSP in a Windows world, I still feel like is bigger than a small company and focused on Apple. Sure. But we were pretty big. We were over $1 million, heading towards 2 million. And I was at a Robin Robbins. Do you know Robin Robbins through the MSP marketing? Again,
I think I've heard the name. Yeah.
Again, very Windows heavy.
Not Baskin and Robbins, Joe.
Robin Robbins. And I'm not, again, not to bash that. It's obviously working for Robin Robbins, but the tone doesn't really resonate with a lot of Apple users. I didn't necessarily like it. And in fact, the equivalent today, which I do and resonates with me, is Tech Tribe. Has anyone heard of Tech Tribe or the Tech Tribe? I'll definitely check that out. Cool. It based out of Australia, but working worldwide. Anyway, I went to one of their seminars, and again, I don't remember what year this was, so this could be outdated. But they said the majority of MSPs in the business are less than $1 million in revenue, and I think that makes sense. And I was under $1 million for a long time before I went through this 10,000 small business program here in Chicago, which was fantastic. It's the Goldman Sachs 10,000 small businesses, and it helped me prepare for the eventual exit strategy that I had. Even though I wasn't necessarily looking for it, it did help me and help me grow the business, get over $1 million, continue to grow. And the reason I'm saying that is when I joined Ntiva, they were 100 million, right? Wow. So it's a much bigger company, and they have since, through acquisition, and this is publicly available stuff, so I'm not spilling any beans here, I think they've almost doubled. Wow. So we're talking about a $200 million MSP. So obviously, when we say MSP, what are we really talking about? Are we talking about the solopreneur who's making a great living on his own, or or her own, or are we talking about a behemoth like Ntiva? That being said, even at Ntiva, at $100 million in revenue, I would talk to Apple, and we weren't big enough for their MSP program.
Wow.
Like, what? How big do we need to be? And there was never any magic number given to me, but the names were thrown out, like Accenture and Deloitte. And are you kidding me?
Wow.
What world are you guys living in? Which I think we could say about a lot of things when it comes to Apple.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you get to be that big without just merging 10 times and being acquired? And it's very hard to build, not that I can say from experience, but to build a $100 million company, that's a pretty long process. Yeah. And so there aren't too many of even those, let alone above that. And so that kind of puts it in perspective. They're 2 orders of magnitude larger than your company, and your company is already pretty substantial from my perspective. So how do you...
And the thing is, so you ask about integrating. And at the time, even though they had done some acquisitions, we were the first acquisition that was Apple focused. And in fact, they had made a decision because they could read the tea leaves that they needed to get better at Apple. They needed to either build a team or acquire a team. And actually, I was introduced to them through a relationship with the Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Business Program that I just mentioned, where a friend of mine in that program had his Windows company was acquired, and he was helping with strategy. And he said, "I thought of you. Let's talk." And again, I wasn't looking to get acquired, but it was about 2019. I had just switched over to Addigy. We we started having these conversations. It was pre-pandemic still. I was growing, but I felt like I was stuck in that middle ground where I need to either get bigger to compete, or I almost felt like I needed to downsize to compete. I couldn't figure out, I was stuck in the middle. I wanted to get better at security. We did get better at security, but the risk and the responsibility, and I was about to turn 50. So all of this combined, and then the pandemic hit, and I'm like, it just felt right for me to make this happen. And one of the reasons I wanted to make it happen is I had tried for years to get Windows teams to cooperate with me. Hey, I'm the Apple expert. I've got the team. We can help you. But there was always some type of cultural or communication barrier that kept that from happening. And so I thought, well, if I embed myself into an organization like Ntiva, then it's got to happen. We've got to figure out how to make this work. And we did, at least I believe we did. There's still room for growth. And I was there 2 years, and I learned a lot about why those things don't happen the way they should. I learned a lot about the Windows industry, and that's what I'm bringing now to Addigy, having conversations. Because let's be honest, I'm not having conversations with Joe and Jerry at your organization, because you guys know Apple, you live and breathe it, you know how to take advantage of the tool. And if you need to talk to somebody, you're probably talking to Ponce, or you're probably talking to Ross, you're talking to somebody who knows more than me. But I'm having conversations with companies like Ntiva, but much smaller. Oh, and the one thing I forgot I'm going to circle back on is when I say Ntiva grew by acquisition, when I joined, one of the challenges was that they had grown by acquisition, which meant they had a lot of small MSPs that weren't fully integrated yet. And there was a lot of back and forth about how we were going to be the central service for them, the Apple central service. And just changing or trying repeatedly, and this is not unique to Ntiva, it's everyone I talk to, but to change that culture of Windows to Windows and Apple, that takes time. Like, it doesn't happen overnight. You can't just acquire a company. You can't just put an Apple logo on your website. You can't just say you have an Apple guy on the team. It's like you've got to change the way the sales team talks, the way the support team talks. And I think you all know what I'm talking about. There's just this ingrained sort of culture of, we've been ignoring Apple for so long. Right. And now you're telling me we support Apple? I don't know what to do with that. So it takes practice and it takes time, and you have to make a commitment to it. And those that do succeed. And I think the biggest roadblock to Apple growing in the enterprise, and believe me, they're growing fine, right? They don't need to hear from little old me about what they need to do better. And it's not necessarily them, but the reason they don't grow more quickly is because old school, in my opinion, old school IT teams, they just this is how we've always done it. Windows. We're making good money, or this is how everyone else does it. No one's ever been fired for recommending Windows type thing. Right. And Apple is still very much scary to them. It's scary to in-house IT teams. It's scary to MSPs who think they can't make money off of it. And the last thing I'll say about that is in all my discussions, I never thought I would support Windows. I never did. And I appreciate that you guys don't. But I believe today, based on what I know, that the two of you, with your experience and your customer service skills and your knowledge in Apple, could very easily support the Windows world and excel at it. You could do both, and you would be wildly successful. Whereas the Windows teams really struggle to make that move to Apple. They just can't. And I equate this to the idea that they still think about the box. They're only concerned about the box, the black box. That's their responsibility to patch and inventory and run compliance on.
Not the person.
Exactly. Yeah. Not necessarily the person. In fact, the person is frustrating to them.
The person's the problem for them. Yeah.
Sorry, I saw. Were there some questions that popped up that I totally ignored?
No, you're good. No, just Simon in the chat, Simon Howes, also just validating what you were saying about the difficulties getting the Windows-centric company to think about Apple. And as you illustrated it, it's easier in some ways for the Apple people to just add Windows, because we do have the kind of skills and customer service experience, which is table stakes for supporting Apple. People that use Apple oftentimes are looking for someone who is more personable, who can understand the whole ecosystem and not just turn a screwdriver to fix the box. Not to disparage anybody doing Windows support, obviously, but yeah, that's Simon validating what you're saying.
But I do think, and again, it's hard to talk about it without sounding like we're disparaging, but Apple is, again, leading the way on how modern IT can and should operate.
Yeah.
And the Windows teams, if they're not careful, they will become laggards if they're not already, and they're going to fall behind. And those teams that don't openly embrace the Apple platform, they're just going to die off. I think we're all seeing that happen, but they're really fighting it because they just think it's easier. Just explaining the benefits of Apple Business Manager, although they may conceptually understand it, they don't like the difficulty required to make it actually work. Because it's not as easy as taking ownership of Active Directory and just owning the fleet of Windows devices. And there's that chain of trust that Apple has built, and there's a reason why they've done that. And yes, they could make it easier, and they could make it easier for us to help our customers. And they have made it easier. But at the end of the day, I think the Windows teams are content with what they've been doing. And again, they don't like change. So that's my little soapbox. Again, the challenge I have is I go on calls like this, which thank you again for having me on the show.
Thank you.
But this is this is the Apple bubble that we all live in.
Yeah.
I doubt you're going to have Windows people showing up to this podcast. And even though people know me in the Apple world, and that helps me open some doors, it doesn't help me in the Windows world. I'm not, even though I have a great success story with how to do this on the Apple platform.
Yeah.
It's amazing. The Windows guys, they don't care.
Yeah. Interesting.
But those that do care, who I think are the smart ones, because they're talking to me, listening to me, and we're helping them grow, then they're being successful on the Apple platform. And so that's my soapbox, and that's my summary.
So the conversations, the leads that you're getting from within Addigy, just to enlighten us some more, you're talking to IT professionals. You're not talking to the small companies. You're talking to the larger MSP providers who are maybe exclusively Windows, but they're looking at Apple and kicking the tires.
Yeah, that's a good question.
That's the type of conversations you're having for the most part?
To further clarify, I'm not even involved in sales at Addigy. That's totally different. I'm helping existing customers build a program to expand their use of Addigy and Apple. And I always try to lead with Apple, right? We talked about this, I think, before we went live. I'm always surprised because I forget that I can be categorized as a vendor. Like I've gone on forums before and, don't listen to this guy. He's a vendor. Like, what? Who? Me? What?
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess when I'm associated with Addigy, they're considered a vendor. Of course, we hate that word. We like the word partner. But the point of me saying that is that if you're an Addigy customer, then I want to help you grow. And I do have a lot of one-on-one conversations that go really well. And we're trying to build out more one-to-many options. And then we have conversations, I think Simon mentioned it here, where the Addigy admin loves Addigy, has all the right reasons for using it, but internally, they haven't decided what their plan is for Apple. So they're wondering why they're not seeing any Apple devices. And of course, they're not seeing any Apple devices because they have no plan for Apple devices. They just think they magically appear, like the Windows machines all magically appear for them. So trying to have those business level conversations around how they can make changes to actually make that growth happen is what I try to do if I can get a seat at the table.
Yeah.
And how does Addigy find for you these people to talk to? Are there people just dialing them up saying, I need ideas? Let me talk to your idea man. And that's you?
Yeah, that's a good question. And because the Addigy has a ton of customers and they're growing, they're trying to figure out the best way to engage their customers. And again, being totally transparent, I think Addigy's struggle as they grow is how do they continue to offer that great level of service, which they've offered everybody, how they continue to do that as they continue to grow. And so if we can help with some underlying, not just with technology, but with communication internally, with sales communication, with MSP to customer communication, which I'm a really big advocate for, then we can help everyone grow more easily and less burden on the Addigy support team. And this is another thing which maybe us living in the Apple bubble kind of forget is sometimes Addigy, at least in my view, their support team can get burdened by basic questions that have nothing to do with Addigy. They're just Apple concepts that IT teams don't understand because they didn't grow up in the Apple world. They're new to the Apple world. So they're like, why do I have to deal with all these pop-ups? Can't you guys fix this? And we all understand technically why there are certain pop-ups we can't eliminate, but they don't always understand that. And that was something that in Ntiva we had to address, meaning they were very comfortable. And again, I don't think I'm saying anything out of line here. This is pretty typical for any MSP, Windows-based MSP. But they were very much had a plan for their Windows devices. You enroll, you get put into their system, their management system, and you get X, Y, and Z, and everything else is either extra or there was a solid structured plan. But they had no plan for Apple. So they had Apple devices all over the place, and they had Apple devices that they weren't even supporting. And so we eventually got to a point where we agreed from a tech stack that we would standardize on the tool that we had built around, which was Addigy with some extra stuff like VisionBot. And anytime a customer called in, if they weren't in the system, we would get them enrolled. And I was shocked. I should not have been, but I was shocked how many times I had to have the conversation with the client around why we have to enroll your device and what that means for you. Because the pushback was, you've never asked to enroll my device before. And are you going to be able to read my text messages and my browsing history? And it was almost like they expected it on the Windows machine. And that was one of my questions. We do enroll your Windows machines, correct? Yes. Wouldn't it be natural that we would enroll your Mac devices?
Right.
Yeah, but you've never mentioned it before. I thought Apple devices just took care of themselves. I think people literally told them that at one point.
Yeah, right.
So there was a lot of customer education that had to happen and setting expectations and making them feel comfortable that, despite the fact that they may believe, and I can't say whether it's true or not, they may believe that everything is transparent on the Windows side and everyone can see everything you're doing. But they were really concerned about that on the Apple side, and showing them that Apple is more concerned about privacy and security, in my view, than the Windows side. So it was this weird, who's feeding you this information?
It's a really interesting philosophical difference that the Windows users, probably through like historical management of their computers, just to come to expect that the IT overlords are basically have full access and they're controlling what people can do and can't do. And it's much more locked down as a corporate-owned device that probably a lot of people also don't really want to use. Whereas if the company hands them a Mac, they're excited. They're like, "This is great! I get a Mac. I'm gonna sign into iMessage. I'm gonna use it for all the features that the Mac offers."
Yeah.
And also to your point, they think of it as this personal device. Whereas the Windows machine, if they're not working on it, it's just sitting there collecting dust. They probably are not using it for personal use, and so maybe don't care as much about those privacy concerns. And ironically, Apple does care more probably than Microsoft does about privacy.
That's because Windows is for business, Joe, and Mac is for the home.
That's right.
People.
Yeah.
When you're at home, you use your Mac.
Yeah.
That's why.
Yeah, Simon's just validating what you said again, Ben, about the pushback we get from the Apple users. It's also, it's a cultural shift too, because probably a lot of that in the company needs to shift with how other employees are talking to customers and how they're presenting it and positioning the management of the Mac. And it occurs to me as you're describing Windows IT companies, Windows MSPs that are looking to add Apple and manage them using Addigy, wondering like where all the Macs are. And some of that is just, it's like getting to know the systems, like getting to know what you can do so you can position it and you can explain why we need to enroll these devices and what the benefits of enrolling them are, because there's probably a lot of devices out there that should be enrolled that, like you said, just just aren't yet. And so you found in your experience, it was that passive process of just customer calls in, they have the Mac, and you get it enrolled. Is that the way you're finding like many of these companies are managing to get the Macs enrolled, or is there a more proactive approach that you're using?
Yeah, that's a good question. And proactive is definitely the way to go. And we did take a proactive approach, but then you have to also realize there will still be the reactive response. Totally. So you do the best you can with the proactive. And in fact, I think at the time, and these are my memory is rough on this, but I believe it was like Ntiva thought they had a few hundred Apple devices floating out there that were unmanaged. And we discovered, at least before I left, over 1,000. So they literally did not realize how many devices that they were leaving unmanaged, company-owned devices that were being unmanaged across. And we're talking thousands of devices that they manage on the Windows side and a small percentage on the Apple.
That was money on the table.
Yeah.
Leaving money on the table.
Yeah. And they sound like a very well-run organization. Even before you joined and brought this perspective, there's probably, that just illustrates how many Windows companies there are out there that are just, like to Jerry's point, leaving money on the table, but also really not doing a good job of managing the Macs. And because if you're implying to the customer, oh, Macs take care of themselves, and secretly we don't really know what to do with them, actually, that's also not a good thing. That's definitely a security concern and beyond. That illustrates a pretty huge market out there for maybe even some of us Mac MSPs to try and find partners in the Windows world to try and just help them. It's like, take care of that problem, right?
Yeah, I agree. And I would encourage a Windows company, if you're getting started in Apple, to leverage a company like yours, Jerry or Joe, because that's just going to be easier, and it's going to take a while for them to learn, and they have to be committed to it. And that's something else. I've seen this from the inside at Addigy, where a company, and believe me, I don't know how they do it, but they pick up a Mac-only customer, their first one ever. Like, how did you do this? Why? Did you just, a friend of a friend said, oh, use these guys? They don't know anything about the product. So, of course, they Google, they find Addigy, and they think that they can just install the tool once and be done with it. And we all know, I often equate it, no matter what tool you're using, to weeding the garden. Like, you plant the seeds, but you can't just walk away. You got to give it water and attention, and get technology changes so quickly. We all know the updates are coming out on Monday that are going to force us to adapt and make changes. And I'm sure we'll discover things that we didn't anticipate. And that's something else. Some of these Windows companies, they will say they do things because they probably did once do them, but those things died on the vine. They never, like with the latest update, they stopped working. And but the feed they have in their mind is that they're still doing something. So I think we're good. Like, no, you're not.
Right. You need to evolve with the technology. It's really important, which is not all that easy to do. I've seen a lot of examples of people doing it as long as the three of us have been at this, where it's really hard for people to keep up. There's probably been waves of like when PPPC came along and you started to have to jump through those hoops, when just MDM, when the MDM came along, probably a lot of people didn't evolve with that. And it's not too late. These tools are pretty sophisticated. Knowing Addigy really well, it doesn't take that much effort to just dive in. Like, start managing your own devices in your own company, start practicing with some VMs and things like that. And pretty soon you have a pretty good like playbook and reusable policies and things that you can start to apply to your clients. People just have to dive in and start to understand it. And that goes for the Windows people too. They need to just really start to like practice with the tool and just keep checking it. And the other thing to do is to go to the Mac admins Slack and sign up for the Addigy channel and just pay attention, because people will ask things and people will answer them. And you start to just absorb the information about best practices, how to handle certain things that have changed. But that's really necessary in this industry, probably more than most industries. And it's the only way to remain successful after 10, 20, maybe 30 years of doing this.
Yeah, for sure. And just to harp a little bit on the MDM aspect, we're still educating Windows teams that an RMM is not enough. You need MDM. And we all know that DDM is the next iteration of that. Any tool that's just implemented the basic MDM functionality they're nowhere near implementing DDM. And I am really proud that Addigy is leading the way on the DDM front and doing their best to embrace all of those options that Apple's giving us. And between DDM and the most recent push to elevate iOS, which we all know Addigy focused on the Mac before they start focusing on iOS. But the iOS stuff that's coming out with self-service and the recent screen share on iOS is everyone's super excited about.
Definitely. Yeah. That's another area where I've lagged a little bit, where obviously I've mainly focused on the Mac and supporting the iPhones just in a more casual way for my clients. But iPhones, Apple TVs, iPads, Vision Pro, someday we'll have a client. I don't have one yet that needs that managed, but that'll be possible too. And there's a lot you can do that, again, you just have to practice it. And I've been just slowly dipping my feet in with experimenting with my own devices and now managing client devices that are used in a fashion where you want some control. Like, you need to ensure that they stay up to date. You need to be able to lock them to a single app. You need to be able to, like, even just remote reboot, things like that. And there's lots you can do just to dip your toes in, where you can start to realize what's possible on the iOS side. And that's evolving, as you said. So now's a great time for people to be practicing with that stuff so you can start to adopt some of the new features as they become available as well.
Yeah. I do want to mention one thing. Hey, Tim. Yeah, Tim Pearson.
Another great Addigy order, Tim Pearson, and supporter of ours in the chat. Yeah, DDM is the MDM you always wanted. It's true. As I remember putting it to Jason when he was on the last time, MDM was you take some instructions and throw it over the wall, and you hope that it's received and the instructions are followed on the other side. But you have to keep asking, did you get the message? Did you take care of that? DDM is declarative. It's actually saying, this is the instruction, and I'm going to assume that this is done unless I hear otherwise, kind of thing. So in practice, it's more efficient as a protocol, and it's more effective. You can be more certain that the thing actually gets done. But yeah, that's a great point, Tim, that it's the MDM you always wanted.
Yeah. I was going to go, this may be going back just a little bit, but you mentioned, or somebody mentioned, maybe it was me, I don't know, mentioned compliance. I don't know if any of you were on, we hosted, I'm forgetting his name, but he's from NIST, the National Institute of Technical Standards. Do I have that right?
Yeah, standards and technology, something along those lines. Yeah.
And I was asking him, so it was an Addigy hosted event, but I was asking him how they came up with these standards and how they developed them. And something I didn't realize, or what I learned during this interaction, is that there really isn't a clear standard on the Windows side like I thought there was, which kind of explains why I would go into so many meetings about security and compliance, and I would say to a Windows team, just tell me what you're doing on the Windows side and we'll try to match that on the Apple side. And I would get crickets. And I don't know if I always thought, do they just not want to share with me? And thinking back, I'm not sure they had a good answer. So they didn't really know how to respond, because in this webinar, I wish I could remember his name. I'll remember it as soon as we end this.
Tim says maybe Bob. Is that his name? He's
yes,
Bob in the chat.
Bob, okay. I think it is.
Bob what, Tim?
Yeah, Bob.
Bob, yeah.
We'll call him Bob for now.
Yeah.
So Bob said that in his experience of working with these teams to develop these benchmarks, and this is in cooperation with, I think Apple's supporting it. If you go on their apple.com website, they have a security foundation or security something. Again, just throwing out vague words that I hope we can all figure out. But the point is, he said that Windows teams, he was on a project where the Windows teams took months to implement compliance standards across the fleet. And he said using, and not to, yes, I'm going to use Addigy as an example, but I'm pretty sure this could be done with other tools who are Apple focused as well. But again, Addigy has a great compliance solution. It took a few days to really test, implement, and roll out compliance. So what I realized in that conversation, the reason I mention this is I often think that Apple is trying to catch up to this mystical thing that, Windows admins say, oh, this is how we do it. It's so easy and great. But there are a lot of things you cannot do from an administrative standpoint on the Windows platform. And compliance appears to be one of them that is either very expensive or just very challenging, or both. And so we have these unique opportunities and tools on the Apple platform that, again, Apple's leading the way in how things can and should be done from an administrative and security and compliance standpoint. And And so what I want all of us to take away from this is, because I've always felt as an Apple admin, I'm at the kids table in the big boys room. And
right.
really, those tables are flipping.
That's really interesting. I look at the Windows side the same way you're describing. As Jerry said, Windows is for business. And like we're just playing along on the Mac, like making it work. But from what you're describing, I may have that backwards, that actually Apple's really taken the lead with a lot of these changes that we've all been annoyed with over the last like 5 to 10 years. Even again, going back to the beginnings of MDM and PPPC and things like that. They have left aside the previous way of doing things, and they've really built from the ground up the platform that we need to be able to ensure that you can enforce compliance like this. And Addigy, just taking that and running with it, the number of people at the ACES conference who said, seriously, guys, you have to just try the security and compliance features, and just, it's as simple as basically clicking a switch. And then you can just charge your client for that level of compliance, and you enforce it. You have to practice it and test it and all these things, but you may not want to just enforce it and then suddenly have certain things be turned off that need to be turned on. So I'm not recommending necessarily everybody just dive in head first, but it is that easy because Addigy has taken those specs that Apple has published and basically said, and that the NIST has published and said, do you want this level or do you want this level? And you can just pretty much dive in and do it. And it's pretty amazing to hear you say that's not exactly the way it is on the Windows side.
Yeah. And I learned that from Bob at NIST. So we know it's true.
Tim chimed in again to say, is it Bob Gendler?
Yes.
Does that sound right? Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Tim. Tim Pearson in the chat. And yeah, there you go. Thank you, Bob Gendler.
What are your thoughts on this merging of 1Password with Collide and what they're trying to do there, that service that they're trying to sell? Is that something that we might be able to see baked into our MDM? It may not be Addigy, but MDMs in the future, a little bit of what Collide was trying to do? Because in theory, it was a good idea.
I must admit, I'm a big 1Password user. I've used it for a long time. The only thing I know about Collide is they would advertise on, was it the Mac Admins podcast, I think? Yeah. But honestly, I haven't followed up. I don't know about I think I heard about the merger, but I don't know what to say about it.
I thought you would be, I didn't, like I said, I didn't mean to put you on the spot here because I'm more ill-informed than you are in that regard.
Yeah, they were a lighter touch way of, you could have the specs that you want the machine to follow, but there isn't a sort of heavy-handed way of managing those conditions and enforcing that and actually making the changes on the client machine. But they would guide the user by way of Slack into, hey, you need to turn on your firewall, or hey, you have this password file on your desktop that you need to delete, that kind of thing. And also allowing it to then maybe not connect to company resources until it went into compliance. And so you have this little bit of a carrot and stick approach, but you still put it at the hands of the user so they know what's happening. But I think for real compliance, you probably need to be able to enforce a lot of this stuff and just send that out and have policies that are followed.
Yeah. I do believe that we would all benefit from organizations taking a more active role in their technology and security.
Yeah.
Meaning they shouldn't just think that we all as IT professionals can magically protect them or do things for them. And that was something that for years at Forget Computers, we were really big on trying to educate our clients and get them engaged. But we know not everyone wants to do that. They've been raised in a different world where IT does take care of things for them. So I think we're going to find going forward that we will have greater engagement. But to your point, if Collide is just the user has to do it, although there's some appeal in that, I don't know that's going to work for everyone, at least not today. Maybe in 20 years it will. I don't know.
Yeah, or maybe it's a little bit of both. Maybe there's certain things you can encourage, but not necessarily enforce.
And speaking of 1Password, although I love it, I dread introducing people to it because it is not that intuitive. I just had a quick story. My father-in-law was in the hospital for a couple months, and thankfully he was able to get out, but he couldn't remember his passwords. Of course, I've been away for a vacation and forgotten a password. He was in the hospital for 2 months. I tried to help him, and we eventually got the help he needed. But you can't just dream up a password for somebody if they don't know their password to their Mac after being away for 2 months. And my wife's, maybe you could get him set up with 1Password. I'm like, I would love to, but I don't know that he can handle it. It's just not that easy yet.
Yeah. iCloud Keychain has gotten so good in the last couple of years, especially I think in the last year now with family sharing and things, that for many clients, certainly in a business setting, you want to have shared vaults and different levels of access and things. And that's great. And we recommend that. But for most residential clients, we don't have to recommend 1Password anymore. We just recommend the built-in iCloud Keychain because it's there. It's just working. It's integrated. It's on all their devices. It's a checkbox. 1Password is a little too... It's too fiddly. You have to add the extension to your various browsers, and just sometimes it doesn't work the way you'd expect, and people forget their separate master password, all those things.
Yeah.
So it's tricky. It's a great tool for business again, but for residential users, I think iCloud Keychain. And then you can share, you may want to have certain passwords be shared with other trusted family members, which Apple now handles that too. So it's a great combination there. Going back to your just comparing the Mac and Windows, Simon Howe's staying up way past his bedtime in the UK. Thanks for still being there, Simon. It says he co-manages support for a large multinational bank, and they're moving many of their staff to Mac OS as they struggle to make Windows devices compliant for their needs.
Wow.
So amazing. Whoever would have thought that this would be a selling point of the Mac? As Jerry put it earlier, Macs are for homes and PCs are for business. And here we are with a large bank that's switching to the Mac for security reasons. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Have I overstayed my welcome? I see we're past the hour.
Yeah, no, not at all. This has been a really great conversation. I'm sure we could go longer. We do have a second show scheduled to record, so we probably should wrap up for this session. But maybe we'll have you back, Ben, once we see some new releases from Addigy and more DDM and compliance features rolling out. Like you said, more iOS stuff to talk about as well. And I love this concept also of just helping the Windows MSPs support the Macs that are otherwise unmanaged and possibly a vector of attack in that way. And maybe even talking more about how to get ourselves set up for the possibility of a merger, how to help that become successful if you're looking to either extend your partnership with the Windows IT side or maybe even merge into a Windows-focused company. It's probably always going to be that way. I think to your point, like the Windows MSPs are probably 10 to 100 times larger than most equivalent Mac companies. But hey, maybe you're going to acquire a small Windows MSP into your Mac-based business. And so that could go the other direction as well. It'd be really interesting to suss that out a little bit further. So I'm sure
a lot more to talk about. I'll be back in 10 years from now with the follow-up.
Hopefully less than 10, but absolutely. Yeah.
How can people find you, Ben? Tell everybody where you.
Thanks. I think LinkedIn's the best because I don't like checking email. So I'll just go to LinkedIn. I still have my Forget Computers email address for those that know it, but I don't check it very often. I have an Addigy address, which I use for work. But LinkedIn.
And you've been thrown off Slack because you're a vendor. So
that's right.
That's right. Yeah.
And I have to be careful what I say in the tech tribe too, or I'll get kicked out of there. But I will say, just make sure you spell out the full name. My name is Ben Greiner, not Ben Greisler. So occasionally, I just this week this happens periodically throughout for many years. I'll get a request for Ben Greisler. That's not me. Yeah. But we are playing in the Apple Playground, so I can see how people would get confused.
I'm ignorantly, who is Ben Greisler? Just an Apple consultant, or?
Yeah, he's an Apple consultant.
Long-time ACN. Yeah, I haven't heard his name in a while, but I think I must have crossed paths with him at some point maybe at a conference or something like that. But that's really funny. I noticed that about your names are similar, lookalike names. Yeah.
Yeah. So true story. LinkedIn just last week, somebody contacted me and said, "Hey, we just spoke at Mac sysadmin or in Penn State. Is that right? Mac sysadmin. Do I have the names right? Sometimes I get the names all confused. At Penn State, we just spoke. I've been emailing you and you haven't responded. Ben Greisler, you need to respond to this guy. I was not at that event.
Yeah. Right.
Do you have any old Bender T-shirts that you can send us, or like Bender memorabilia?
Jerry's always trying to get the free swag.
We never made Bender swag, but we should have.
I think I wrote to you, but I would send you an email, and you were saying like, no, it's copyrighted. I can't do that.
You sure you didn't email Ben Greisler, Jerry? Maybe that's the issue.
I think you sent it to the wrong Ben.
The wrong Ben.
I do know some people would say, "Oh, aren't you afraid of copyright issues?" I'm like, if we ever get a copyright notice about this, I would be thankful that it got the attention it did.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm still running Bender at an educational institution I support. Wow. So there you go.
Wow.
Still working.
Yeah, I'll send you the real guy who wrote that, Chad. Oh my God, I'm drawing a blank on the last name only because we've had a couple Chads over the years.
Chad Greisler.
So my apologies to the real Chad that I just going blank on your last name, but I'll get that information out to everyone. The real man behind Bender.
Amazing. Yeah, very cool.
Thanks again for having me on the show. And if you're an Addigy customer, reach out to me because I have permission to talk to you. And if you're not, you can still reach out to me. I just may not have the bandwidth to have all the conversations, but always looking to have new conversations.
Cool. Very great talking to you. Ben Greiner of Forget Computers and Ntiva and Addigy. Thank you so much, Ben, for joining us.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Jerry.
Jerry does his voices of customers of all kinds.
Am I on the cloud?
Joe spins his deeply detailed yarns all the time.
I have a whole story about this.
Sam is on the road again, phoning in from a hotel.
At least we know where I am.
Half a century